Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. Today is my hot list for second quarter 2021. And for those of you who haven't seen the hot list videos before, I've done a few of them in the past. And what I do is every time I put out a quarterly issue of my briefing letter, the Pressy, I usually wait a week or two and then make a video and go through the Pressy that basically I think are some of the hot items within the Pressy itself. And like I said, I do this every time. I try to do this every time a quarterly issue comes out. And just to give viewers an idea of what's, those of you who don't subscribe, what's inside the Pressy, but also to highlight things within the Pressy that I think are really, really super special. So with that, we're going to go to the hot list. Hot list, second quarter 2021. First up, SPD-3 and space traffic management delay. There was an article in Space News, I believe it was 2 weeks ago today, from Dr. Scott Pace, former executive secretary for the National Space Council during the Trump administration, that basically sharing the idea that space traffic management was being delayed by the Department of Commerce, in particular NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And a lot of this had to do with a lack of what they requesting enough money in the budget to actually move this forward. Instead of moving this forward and actually doing something practical with space traffic management, NOAA has basically decided to do 3 more studies to evaluate a study that was already done by the National Space Council. And if you listen to the space show, I was on a couple weeks ago on the space show. Basically, in my interpretation of this is Commerce basically drove SPD-3 and space traffic management into a ditch. Dr. Pace was a lot more diplomatic about his opinion, but in my opinion, this is driving space traffic management in a ditch. And you could, depending on who you talk to, the importance of space traffic management, I don't think it's really hot issue. I don't think it's really critical at this juncture, but the need is going to become greater as we move forward and as space traffic continues to become more prevalent in orbit. So again, this is kind of a disappointment and kind of sidelining a Trump era policy, sidelining it, driving into a ditch. Otherwise it's being delayed, and I really don't expect to see anything moving on this for quite some time. Camden Spaceport environmental impact statement. This Camden Spaceport has been in the news down in Georgia for quite a while. They've been really trying to get a spaceport license there by the FAA. And one of the sticking points has been the environmental impact statement, or even what we call an environmental assessment on basically, how is this going to affect the environment. There was actually a point where they got the environmental assessment, and then there were some lawsuits. There were some that were filed. There were 2 in particular that were filed. One of them settled. The one in federal court settled, and there's still another one pending in Georgia Superior Court. And that has a lot to do with Georgia Freedom of Information Act and such. But the actual impact statement has actually been completed, and it's now available on the FAA's website. So significant hurdle, and we're probably looking at getting Camden Spaceport actually licensed sometime this month. FCC order reconsideration modifying Starlink license. This is basically what Starlink SpaceX was asking the the FCC, was to lower the operating orbit of its Starlink satellite system. And there was a big kerfuffle, about whether or not this should be done. And in particular, Viasat came in and talked about the National Environmental Protection Act and how, an environmental assessment is needed for this. And if you watch my videos, you know how I feel about NEPA and outer space. I mean, it's really irksome. But fundamentally, the FCC came back and said, no, we are not going to, we're not going to think an environmental assessment is necessary, and therefore we're going to license it. Motion for reconsideration denied, what have you. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, and I've already talked about in previous videos, there's been a lawsuit on this. NPRM, allocation of spectrum for non-federal space launches. FCC again, and this is where I say, I mentioned spectrum a lot because spectrum is really important to outer space because you got to communicate, and the spectrum is a limited resource. What's happening here is the FCC is basically coordinating the use of frequencies used for rocket launches. In other words, range control, ground control, flight telemetry, what have you. It's basically going to add these wants to add these frequencies or footnotes to what we call the table of frequencies, which is actually in the Code of Federal Regulations, and actually modify it to basically say, okay, not only do federal agencies have use of these, but also non-governmentals like SpaceX, what have you, who operate launches, will have the ability to use these either. And basically, they're going to have to coordinate between each other for the use, because you can only one agency or one entity can use these frequencies at a time. So the whole idea is to actually codify this into the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, at this point, these frequencies have been used by non-governmental, SpaceX, what have you, but now basically it's being codified into the table of frequencies, or that's what this MPRM wants to do. And again, there's a comment period on this, and it'll be interesting to see what some of the feedback is, but eventually the idea is to get some of these frequencies codified as being usable by non-governmentals as well as federal agencies. Artemis Accords, big happenings in the Artemis Accords, particularly in May. The Republic of Korea, which is South Korea, New Zealand, and Brazil have signed the Artemis Accords. So I believe that brings up to 12. And the Artemis Accords are really important. I mean, I think they're really an awesome step forward for outer space government, because it really builds upon that framework of the Outer Space Treaty and really sets, sets foundation for future outer space governance. Now, on the other hand, you have countries like the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and the Russian Federation, who've been announcing their lunar research, their international lunar research station, and the PRC made some big noise about its Mars ambitions just a few weeks ago. I think all that is basically competition in a sense for this idea of what the Artemis Accords is trying to create. In other words, the PRC and the Russian Federation have their worldview on what outer space government should look like, and the Artemis Accords are basically what the U.S. and its signatories feel that this should be kind of the foundation for future outer space governance. So a lot of this has to do with geopolitics, realpolitik, national interest, and overall great power competition. And this is going to continue forward. My big hope is the Artemis Accords continues to bring new signatories on board. Again, I did a video, I believe, last year about the Artemis Accords. If you go back and look at it on my channel, I did a pretty detailed analysis of the Artemis Accords then. United Kingdom Space Command. And UK has been really prolific in bringing together the idea of space is a warfighting domain. And then it's very, and I think that's very significant from the standpoint of how, future space operations are going to be handled. The United Kingdom set up a space command, I believe it was in April, which is basically their equivalent of U.S. Space Command. Not the Space Force, but U.S. Space Command. So in other words, it's kind of coordinating space activities, what have you. Very significant. I think this is going to play into something else I'm going to be mentioning in a few minutes. But like I said, significant because this goes to the point of recognizing that space is a warfighting domain. Japan Space Resource Law. The Japanese Diet, both houses of the Japanese Diet passed a space resource law, which is basically, I don't have the actual text of it, but chances are it's going to look like the same one that the United Arab Emirates passed, that Luxembourg passed, and that the U.S. basically founded back in 2015. So I'm pretty sure that the text and the idea is the same. Why is this good? Because we have another country that recognizes the concept of space resources and gives more support for this bottom-up approach that space resources is a valid interpretation of Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. So very significant in this respect. I'd like to see some language on it personally, just for curiosity's sake. But my idea is that this is the same as very similar to the U.S. law, the one in the UAE and the one passed in Luxembourg. U.S. Space Command bilateral agreements. Now this ties into the UK Space Command announcement specifically, because I think what's going to happen, you're going to see this idea of U.S. Space Command bilateral agreements is going to tie into UK's Space Command and other things. Where does this come from? Well, there's this really brilliant Rear Admiral in J5 U.S. Space Command by the name of Bernacchi, Admiral Bernacchi, and he did a webinar about a week or so ago, or was it 2 weeks ago? And he basically, during that webinar, he basically said that U.S. Space Command is seeking bilateral agreements with other states. He didn't mention the states, but they're going to, to basically mutual defense in outer space. So the idea is, this is outside the UN, and I think this is going to be in a similar vein to these things on data sharing agreements for space situational awareness. Now, like I said, they didn't mention any of the states, but chances are high that UK, the United Kingdom, is going to be one of those signatories. And I think Australia also signed on, as well as a few of the other traditional allies, probably within the Five Eyes intelligence relationship. So very significant. I really like this idea because, again, this goes back to the idea of recognizing space as a warfighting domain, and it's going to have to be and creates this idea of mutual defense. Now, what might arise out of this is you'll actually have representatives from each from the participants in these agreements, actually, exchanging officers or personnel to serve overseas. In other words, U.S. Space Command will probably have, let's say the UK is one of the signatories. The UK will have an officer or two or personnel, working with U.S. Space Command and vice versa. So I think this is really super significant, just because the idea is we're going around traditional treaties and such, including NATO. I mean, I know that, and one thing that isn't here is NATO basically made an announcement about, convening Article 5, which is the mutual defense article in the NATO and the North Atlantic Treaty that says that. But the idea is, that's nice, but NATO doesn't recognize space as a warfighting domain. It recognizes space as an operational domain. With these bilateral agreements, you're kind of getting around you're kind of getting around NATO and going to countries directly and saying that I'm going to, we recognize space is a warfighting domain. I'm not really sure what the language is, because I haven't seen the agreement or the proposed language of the agreement, but that would be my guess. Now, this is probably going to happen within the next year or so, and when they do happen, I'm sure there will be announcements. And Viasat NEPA litigation. I know I've done a couple of videos on this. My feelings about it. I still think this is a really bad idea on Viasat's part. I mean, this could really go sideways real quick. I think there's a lot at stake. Right now, I haven't checked anything this week, but right now I know they are still trying to deal with the preliminary injunction. Both sides have filed, basically the preliminary injunction and responses by both the FCC and SpaceX, but I don't know if a hearing's been scheduled yet. And basically, before that preliminary injunction is issued, they really can't get it without that hearing. I think the outcome of the preliminary injunction will have a lot of weight in how this appeal the actual appeal itself is decided, just because of some of the arguments. But again, my feelings on this. I really think it's a bad idea. This is not the way to bring this up or to deal with this. And I have some opinions about it. I'll probably talk about that a little bit in a later video, so I won't kind of spoil that now. The Pressy, and every time I go through this, I give anybody watching this video the opportunity to subscribe to my briefing letter. The briefing letter is basically public. The quarterly issues are published 4 times a year, basically on the 26th of March, June, September, and December. Although December is usually published at the end of the second week because of the holidays. Fundamentally, I go through, you look at I have a table of contents that gives you an idea of what I actually do. I'm probably going to be adding another section, I think, on cyberspace, starting with the third quarter 2021 issue. But you get these 4 issues. On top of that, sometimes I'll do special issues in between that will deal with specific topics, and I'll analyze in much greater depth than I do with touching on issues here. If you're interested in receiving a free copy of the Pressy just to look at, go to www.thepressy.net. that tells you all about the Pressy. It has a pricing list, and it also has a link. If you click that and send me an email, I'll be happy to send you a free issue, a quarterly issue of the Pressy. Now, it won't be the current issue of the Pressy, but it'll be the first quarter 2021. That's kind of my policy. If you want to look at the free one, it's usually the quarterly issue before. Then if you subscribe, then I will get you started with the current issue of the Pressy. So that's what I have for this quarter for the hot list, what I think is hot within the Pressy. I mean, there's a lot more in this one. I think it's, 58 pages, this one. And I go into more depth in analysis, and there's some other things in there as well. So if you're interested in becoming a subscriber to the Pressy, just go to that link and send me an email, and I'll make sure you get it done. So that's all I have for this episode. Again, it's where we are officially in summer. Right now it's raining here, but I'm looking forward to a good weekend, and I hope you have a safe weekend as well.